The afternoon had already drained more life out of me than it should have by the time I pushed open the glass door of the Redwood County Public Safety Office. I hadn't planned on being here. No one plans to spend their day reporting a missing wallet. But after retracing my steps through half the town and coming up empty, this beige building with its humming lights and old posters was the last place left to go. The reception area smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet, the sort of scent that didn't belong to any one moment. It clung to the place itself. A young man behind the desk barely lifted his head before pointing down a narrow hallway. "Officer Vaughn can take your statement. First door on the left." I thanked him, though he didn't seem to hear it, and walked toward the office. The hall was long enough that the buzz of the air conditioning echoed a little, and for a moment I wondered why I felt oddly nervous. It wasn't like I'd done anything wrong. Losing a wallet is an annoyance, not a crime. Still, there was something about official spaces that made you straighten your spine and second-guess every step. I knocked once before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was modest, almost plain. A desk, a computer, a pair of metal chairs, and a filing cabinet with a dent along the bottom drawer. But the man sitting behind the desk changed the whole atmosphere at once. Officer Carter Vaughn looked like someone carved from order and control. Not in a cold way, more like every part of him was focused, contained. His brown uniform shirt was neatly tucked, sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms that looked permanently tense. His posture was perfect. His jaw was tight. His attention was absolute. When he looked up at me, his eyes were steady but not harsh. "Afternoon. Come on in," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. I sat, exhaling without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Yeah, I'm Lucas Hale. I'm here to report a missing wallet." He nodded, typing something into the computer before switching to a notepad. "All right, Mr. Hale. Tell me what happened." He had the sort of voice that made you sit straighter without meaning to. Calm, controlled, low. It made me feel oddly safe, even though we were talking about a lost piece of leather that held more receipts than cash. "I run a repair shop over on Maple Street," I began. "I stopped by the gas station on Route 12, and when I got home an hour later, the wallet wasn't in my pocket. I backtracked but didn't find anything." He nodded again, writing with precise, almost neat strokes. "Anyone else near you at the station?" "Just a couple of people filling up. Nobody close enough to bump me." "All right," he said. "Could be you dropped it accidentally. Happens more than you think." He reached for a form tucked into the stack on the side of the desk, and that's when I saw it. A small tightening in his jaw as he leaned forward. Not dramatic, but noticeable enough that something was off. "You okay?" I asked. He stiffened for half a second and shrugged it off. "Yeah, just a small thing." His hand drifted briefly toward his lower side before returning to the table like nothing happened. I raised an eyebrow. "That didn't look like nothing." He hesitated, then let out a low exhale, the kind someone gives when they know denial won't work. "Got stung by something earlier. Out behind the station. Probably a hornet. Thought it'd stop aching by now." "A hornet?" I leaned forward. "Did it swell up?" "A little," he said, brushing it off, though his posture said otherwise. "I grew up around farmland," I told him. "You should really check that. Those can mess you up for hours if they swell wrong." He gave me a dry, almost amused look. "You offering to do a medical inspection?" "Someone should," I said. "Pretty sure you can't file paperwork if you pass out." For the first time, the tightness around his expression softened, just barely. "You're persistent. I've been called worse." He paused. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "There's a first aid room down the hall. If you really think it's necessary, you can show me," I said, standing. He shook his head but pushed himself up anyway. As he did, that same tight breath escaped him, this time sharper. I stepped closer instinctively, and though he didn't say it out loud, his brief nod told me he accepted the help. We walked down the narrow hallway, the faint smell of antiseptic growing stronger as we approached a door with a peeling label. The room inside was small, really just a converted storage closet. A cot, a metal cabinet filled with gauze, a sink that dripped every few seconds, and fluorescent lighting that flickered as if on its last days. Carter closed the door behind us, suddenly looking more self-conscious than he ever did in uniform. "Didn't expect an audience for this," he muttered. "It's fine," I said, keeping my tone easy. "I'm not here to grade your first aid technique." That earned a small sound, almost a laugh. "Where did it sting you?" I asked. He hesitated for half a beat, then unbuttoned the lower side of his shirt enough to reveal the skin above his belt. The welt was there, angry and red, slightly swollen. It pulsed with the kind of discomfort that wasn't dangerous but definitely painful. "Ouch," I murmured. "That's not nothing, definitely. It's manageable," he said, though his jaw tightened again. "Good thing I didn't believe you," I said softly. I grabbed a disposable towel, ran it under cold water, and folded it before pressing it gently against the welt. He tensed at the initial touch, his breath catching, but then he exhaled slowly. "Cold?" I asked. "A little," he admitted, "but it helps." The room was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent light and the slow dripping sink. Strange how a moment like this, out of routine, unexpected, completely ordinary, could feel heavier than it should. Not romantic, not anything close, just human. Two people standing in a cramped room, one helping the other because no one else was around to bother. "You really know what you're doing," he said after a moment. "My mom kept bees," I replied. "I got stung more times than any kid should." That pulled another small exhale of something like amusement from him. "Guess I got lucky you walked in today." I pressed the towel gently again, watching the redness ease a little. He shifted slightly, not in discomfort this time, but like he wasn't used to someone being that close in a way that wasn't professional or distant. "You're sure it's not too bad?" he asked quietly. "It'll sting for a bit, but the swelling should go down soon," I said. "You'll be fine." He nodded, a quiet acceptance. When I stepped back, he adjusted his shirt and straightened, back into the role of Officer Vaughn, though something in his eyes had softened. "Thanks," he said, and this time it wasn't formal. It was personal. A small acknowledgement that this moment, whatever it was, meant something to him. "Don't mention it," I said. We walked back to his office. The atmosphere felt different now, lighter maybe, but also fuller. He finished filling out the report, his voice calm as ever, but the warmth underneath it wasn't subtle anymore. He handed me a copy of the statement. Our fingers didn't touch, but they almost did. "If anyone turns in the wallet, we'll call you," he said. "Sounds good," I replied, standing. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, but wasn't sure what it should be. In the end, he just nodded once, slowly, meaningfully. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Hale." "You too, Officer Vaughn." I left the station with one less wallet, but something strange tugging at me. Something small, quiet, unexplainable. I didn't know what to call it yet, but it lingered even after I stepped into the cool air outside, the door closing behind me with a soft echo. And for reasons I couldn't name, I found myself thinking about the flicker of warmth in a man who seemed built from control. I didn't expect that moment to matter, but it already did. 3 days passed before I heard anything from Officer Vaughn again. I told myself the moment in the first aid room was just that. A moment. Weird circumstances. A sting. A stranger stepping in to help. Nothing meaningful. Nothing to read into. But every now and then, when I was sweeping my shop or repairing a cracked phone screen, the image of him leaning slightly forward, jaw tight with pain he refused to admit to, it flashed back through my head. Annoyingly so. By the fourth morning, I'd nearly convinced myself I'd imagined the whole connection. Then my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Hello," a familiar, steady voice answered. "Mr. Hale? This is Officer Vaughn from Redwood County. Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." For a moment, my brain lagged behind my heartbeat. "No, not at all. Everything okay?" "Yes," he said after a short pause that felt purposeful. "I was reviewing your missing property report this morning and realized we left a portion of it incomplete." His tone dropped just enough to sound slightly embarrassed. "If you're free, would you mind coming in to sign one last section?" I turned toward the clock on my workshop wall. I wasn't busy, not really, But even if I had been, I suspected I would have found a way to clear the schedule. Sure, I said casually. I can swing by later this afternoon. 2 o'clock works? That works. There was another faint pause, warm around the edges. All right, see you then. When he hung up, I found myself staring at the phone longer than necessary. Part of me wondered if the paperwork truly needed my signature or if there was another reason behind the call. Something he wasn't ready to say out loud. I didn't let myself dwell too long. I closed the shop at 1:45 and drove over. The station looked smaller this time, less official and more familiar. The same receptionist from before pointed down the hall again. He's waiting for you, she said, sounding amused in a way I didn't know how to interpret. I knocked on his office door. Come in, he called. Carter looked up from his computer the moment I stepped inside, and the usual firmness in his posture softened. His shirt sleeves were rolled up again, exposing tanned forearms, and a paper cup of coffee sat beside his elbow. Afternoon, he said, leaning back slightly. Thanks for stopping by. Of course, I replied. Didn't want you to accidentally file my report as missing livestock or something. A small smirk tugged at his mouth. Tempting. I sat across from him again, and for a moment it felt like the room had changed. Or maybe we had. The air between us wasn't stiff or formal. It was easy, familiar. The form's right here, he said, tapping a folder. But before we get to it, do you want some coffee? I just made a new pot. He stood before I could answer, crossing to the machine in the corner. It was a small gesture, but it said something. Not protocol, not politeness. Something simple, something human. Something he didn't offer to everyone. Coffee sounds great, I said. When he handed me the cup, our fingers almost brushed. Again, not intentional, but not entirely an accident. He settled back into his chair, watching me over the rim of his cup with a faint uncertainty, like he wasn't used to sharing moments that weren't part of the job. So, I said, taking a sip, any more dangerous wildlife encounters since last time? Any killer bees ambushed the station? He gave a soft snort. Thankfully no. But dispatch did send me on a call involving a raccoon stuck inside someone's pantry. I'm thinking of wearing armor to work. That would definitely complete the tough officer image. He shook his head, amused. After having a civilian patch me up in the supply room, I think that image is already questionable. I laughed, and he let out a half-smile that seemed to warm the whole room. The kind of smile that didn't rush, didn't force itself, just softened everything around it. For a minute or two, we just drank our coffees. No pressure, no silence that begged to be filled, just breathing in the same space. So what brought you to Redwood Crossing? He asked eventually. Your shop. Did you start it recently? I shrugged. Been here almost 6 years. I like small towns, slower pace, fewer surprises. Fewer. I smiled faintly. Okay. Maybe some surprises. He tilted his head, acknowledging the reference. What about before that? Family around here? Sort of. My parents moved a few towns over when my father got sick. After he passed, I stayed. The quiet helped. He didn't push for more. He just nodded slowly, thoughtfully, like he understood the kind of silence that comes from grief. Then he leaned back, taking a breath. This job eats time, he said. Night shifts, early shifts, skipped meals, canceled plans. It's easy to let the rest of life disappear. He traced his thumb along the side of his coffee cup. Some nights I forget what day it is. I studied him for a moment. The lines around his eyes weren't harsh, just tired. The kind of tired that settles deeper than physical exhaustion. Doesn't leave much room for anything else, huh? No, he said, voice quiet. Not really. There was no self-pity in his tone. Just honesty, plain and unadorned. It told me more about him than any badge or title ever could. I get that, I said. For a long time, I didn't let myself get close to anyone either. After losing someone, it felt easier to keep things surface level. No risk, no pain. Carter didn't look away. His attention was steady, deliberate. He wasn't just listening, he was absorbing it. I'm sorry, he said softly. 5 years with someone. That's not easy to move past. The way he said it made something loosen in my chest. People usually filled silence with cliches, but he didn't. He sat with the truth of it instead. Thanks, I murmured. Another pause, more comfortable this time. Well, he said, tapping the folder lightly, I guess you deserve some compensation for the emotional labor. We should at least finish your report. He opened the folder, but he didn't look at the papers right away. Instead, his eyes lingered on me for a second too long, unintentional but telling. He cleared his throat. Anyway, sign here and we'll be good. I signed, handed the document back, and he tucked it neatly into the file. He stood when I did, escorting me halfway to the door because, apparently, he was the kind of man who still believed in small, old-fashioned courtesies. As I reached for the handle, his voice stopped me. You free this weekend? The question hung there, casual on the surface, but only on the surface. I turned. Yeah, I think so. Why? He shifted slightly, the faintest hint of hesitation passing through his eyes. There's a county fair just outside town. Good food. Terrible music. He almost smiled. Thought maybe we could grab a coffee there. You know, in a less official setting. A grin tugged at my lips before I could stop it. Are you asking me out, officer? He rolled his eyes but didn't deny it. I'm asking you to make sure I don't get stung by anything else. Purely for safety reasons. Right? A noble cause. His smile, small, genuine, was the warmest thing I'd seen all week. All right, I said. I'll meet you there. Good, he murmured almost too quietly. When I stepped back into the main office, the afternoon light stretching across the floor, I felt something strange in my chest. Something light, something familiar but long forgotten. Possibility. For the first time in years, it felt like something was shifting. Not in some dramatic, earth-moving way, but slowly, like a door opening an inch at a time. And for reasons I wasn't ready to examine too closely, I hoped I'd see Carter Vaughn again long before the weekend. It had only been a day since we'd talked about the fair, and I'd been doing my best not to overthink it. Maybe it was just two guys grabbing coffee. Maybe it was nothing. But every time I replayed the way Carter had looked at me, steady, unsure, like he was deciding something quietly inside himself, I felt a tug I wasn't used to feeling anymore. So when a knock sounded on my apartment door that Saturday evening, I naturally assumed it was a customer who'd tracked me down after hours. I wiped my hands on a rag and pulled the door open. And there he was, not in uniform. No badge, no radio, no stiff posture. Just dark jeans, a plain gray jacket, and a simple t-shirt beneath. His hair was slightly messy, as if the wind had caught it on his way over. Without the armor of the uniform, he looked younger, more human, more unsure. Hey, he said, offering a small smile that didn't quite hide the nerves behind it. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. No, you're not, I said quickly. Everything okay? He shifted his weight, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Yeah, everything's fine. I was actually just in the area. Thought I'd check in. You know, about your case. I raised an eyebrow. My missing wallet case? He cleared his throat, cheeks coloring slightly. Let's just say I was passing by, across town, on a Saturday. Right? I said, trying not to laugh. Well, since you're here, come in. He stepped inside, glancing around the small living space like he was taking mental inventory of each corner. My apartment wasn't much, just a converted back room behind my shop, with an open layout and a kitchen separated by a half wall. But it felt like home. Warm lighting, shelves with old radios and repair parts, a couch with a worn blanket draped over the side. Nice place, he said softly, running a slow gaze across the shelves. You fix all this stuff yourself? Pretty much, I said. People bring me things they don't want to throw away. He nodded like the thought carried some weight. Guess you like saving things. Guess I do. There was a pause, not awkward, just unfamiliar. The kind of silence that held two people trying to understand why the air felt charged in a way they hadn't planned for. I broke it gently. I was just about to make dinner. Nothing fancy. Just pasta. He hesitated for maybe half a second before saying, Mind if I join? I could use a meal that didn't come from a drive-through window. You're welcome to stay, I said. But I'm warning you, I'm not a chef. He smiled again, relieved. Pasta sounds perfect. While I set a pot of water to boil, he leaned against the counter, watching me like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. His sleeves were pushed up, revealing tan skin and a few faint scars, the kind that told quiet stories he'd never volunteer. Eventually, he relaxed enough to start helping, handing me tomatoes and laughing when I made him chop them. You're surprisingly terrible with a knife, I said. That's not in any of the official training manuals, he replied, deadpan. Maybe it should be. We fell into a soft rhythm, stirring sauce, teasing each other, filling the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in too long. He talked about growing up in a strict household, about choosing law enforcement because it was the one place his sense of control felt useful. I talked about my shop, about the quiet satisfaction of fixing something that other people had given up on. You ever feel like people assume things about you because of your job? I asked as I drained the pasta. He snorted. Constantly. Most folks see the uniform first and everything else second. Some don't see anything else at all. What do they miss? He paused. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wasn't used to being asked. That I'm more than the badge, I guess, he said finally. When we sat down to eat, the lights of the street outside cast soft patterns across the table. The room smelled of garlic and basil. He took his first bite, then leaned back with a quiet sigh that held more truth than any words could. This is good, he said. You sound surprised. I'm just not used to homemade meals anymore. The way he said it wasn't dramatic, just honest. So honest it hit somewhere deeper. I watched the tension ease out of his shoulders as he talked. He told me about long nights alone in his apartment after shifts, about coming home exhausted to silence and takeout and the constant weight of responsibility he didn't know how to put down. I don't usually let people in, he admitted. Not to my place, not to my time, not to anything. And yet, I said quietly, you're here. He met my eyes with an expression I couldn't read fully. Uncertainty, curiosity, something soft enough to be dangerous. Yeah, he murmured. I'm here. After dinner, we washed dishes together, moving in a small, domestic rhythm that felt strangely easy. I rinsed, he dried. Our hands brushed once, then again. The second time, he stopped, not pulling away, just stilling, as if he wasn't sure whether to apologize or acknowledge the moment. You're not bad at dishes, Sergeant, I joked, lightening the tension. Don't tell anyone, he said, smiling quietly. It'll ruin my reputation. The warmth in the room lingered long after the plates were set aside. When he finally grabbed his jacket, he didn't put it on immediately. Instead, he stood near the door, hesitating. I'm glad I came by, he said, voice low. I wasn't sure if it'd be weird. It wasn't, I said. It was good. He nodded slowly. You make things feel easy. It's been a long time since I felt that. There was nothing calculated about the way he said it. Just truth, simple and bare. He took a small step closer, not enough to cross any lines, but enough that I could see the shift in his eyes. Then he reached out, briefly, gently, and touched my arm. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a hug. Just a brush of his fingers, warm through the fabric of my sleeve. Thank you, he said quietly. For dinner. Anytime, I replied, and I meant it more than I expected to. When he left, I walked to the window and watched him descend the steps, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. My apartment felt different after the door closed. Not empty, just quieter in a new way, peaceful way. The leftovers still smelled faintly of garlic. His laughter still echoed inside the room like a warm aftertaste. I leaned against the counter and took a breath, the kind that reaches deeper than air. This wasn't love, not yet. It wasn't even a confession. It was a spark sliding into something slow and steady, something that didn't demand an answer right away. But as I stood there in the soft glow of my kitchen lights, I knew one thing. Something had shifted. Something real. Something neither of us had expected. It rained the entire day. A slow, steady downpour that blurred the world outside my window into gray smears of motion. The kind of rain that didn't demand attention, but settled into the background like a quiet ache. By evening, I'd finished closing up the shop and was sitting in my small living room, listening to the rhythmic tap of drops against the glass. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't expecting anything at all. So when someone knocked, once, then again firmer, it startled me enough that I froze for a second. No one came by unannounced. Not at this hour. Not in weather like this. But when I opened the door, I understood exactly why my heart had reacted before my mind. Carter stood on the doorstep, rain-soaked and restless, his black sweater damp around the shoulders, jaw clenched like he'd driven here battling something more than the storm. His hair was darker, plastered slightly to his forehead. His eyes were the same, steady, sharp, but something in them was unsettled. "Hey," I said, confused but not surprised. "What are you doing here? Everything okay?" He didn't step inside right away. He just stood there under the awning, breathing like he'd run the whole way. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," he said quietly. "I just needed to see you." The tone of his voice, low, tight, unguarded, made my chest tighten. I stepped aside immediately, and he walked in, dripping faintly onto the mat. He didn't take off his sweater, didn't shake off the rain. He just stood in the middle of the room, hands on his hips, staring at the floor like he was trying to find the right words, but none of them were cooperating. "You want coffee?" I asked gently. "Or tea? Or a towel?" "No," he shook his head. "I'm fine. I don't need anything." But he did. It was obvious. His shoulders rose and fell with one steadying breath before he sank onto the edge of the couch. Not leaning back, just sitting there, elbows on his knees. I took the chair across from him, giving him space to speak first. The rain filled the silence. After a long pause, he finally said, "I've been thinking about that night, about dinner, about the way it felt being here." My heart beat a little harder, but I kept my voice even. "You don't have to explain anything." His eyes flicked up to mine, brief, pained, honest. "Yeah, I do." He rubbed the back of his neck like he was bracing himself. "I've gone over it in my head more times than I should admit. I keep trying to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that you were just being kind, that I just connected to that because I've been alone for too long." He swallowed, jaw tense. "But every time I try to rationalize it, it doesn't work, because it wasn't just that. And I haven't stopped thinking about it since. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I don't know what this is," he continued, voice low but steady. "I don't know what it's supposed to be. I don't have the right words for it. I've spent my whole life keeping my feelings categorized and boxed away where they can't get in the way. But when I'm here, with you, everything gets confusing and easy at the same time." The softness in his eyes when he said it made something inside me bend. "Carter," I said carefully, "you don't owe me an explanation. What happened between us, even if it was small, it mattered to me too. I just didn't know if saying that would make anything harder for you." His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in relief. "You didn't make anything harder," he murmured. "You made it honest. And that scares the hell out of me." I stood slowly, crossing the space between us. I sat next to him, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could see every shift in his expression. He didn't pull away. "When I told you I don't let people in," he said, eyes fixed on his hands, "I meant it. I don't know how to do whatever this is. I spent so long pretending feelings weren't things I needed. But lately, it's like everything I push down is coming up at once. And you don't have to do anything with that right now," I said softly. "You don't have to name it, or define it, or decide what it should be." He looked sideways at me, really looked. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Just be honest," I said. "With yourself. With me. That's enough." He breathed in slowly, held the breath, released it shakily. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "I feel different around you, and I don't know why. I don't know what to call it, but it's real. I know that much." I nodded. feeling something warm settle beneath my ribs. That's all I needed to hear. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he arrived, his posture loosened. He didn't try to hide how vulnerable he felt. He didn't try to pull himself back together instantly. He just let himself sit in that truth. I reached out, slow enough that he could move away if he needed, and placed my hand gently on his arm. He looked at my hand, then at me. No flinch, no retreat, just a quiet click of understanding settling between us. Then he lifted his own hand and covered mine. The warmth of it, the certainty of that simple gesture, made the room feel smaller, softer. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Outside, the rain softened from steady drumming to a muted patter, like even the storm was listening. After minutes that felt like something unspoken stretching open, he whispered, "I don't know where this goes." "Me neither," I said truthfully. "But maybe it doesn't have to go anywhere yet. Maybe it just needs space." He nodded, the tension leaving him as his hand stayed over mine. His eyes held something new now, a mix of fear and relief, as if admitting the truth had freed him in turn. The town had slipped into its slower rhythm. Fog along the fields, thin frost across car windshields, and the distant hum of wood-burning stoves drifting through the air. It had been nearly 3 months since the night carter arrived at my door in the rain. 3 months of small steps, careful honesty, and a kind of closeness neither of us had expected but both of us kept drifting toward, almost without realizing it. The shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't some dramatic leap. It was slow, steady, a layering of moments that made it hard to imagine things being any other way. At first, Carter started coming over a few evenings a week. Then he'd stay later and leave early. Then he began keeping a spare shirt in my closet, just in case work ran long. Eventually, a toothbrush appeared in my bathroom, then a second pair of shoes by the door. By the time January rolled around, half his uniform hung neatly beside my jackets, and the sight of it didn't feel strange. Felt, right, like the space had been waiting for it. One of my favorite routines that developed between us happened early in the mornings. Carter was always up first, no matter how late he'd worked the night before. Some internal clock he couldn't turn off. I'd wake to the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen and the soft rustle of pages turning. Without fail, I'd find him sitting at the small table, still half in shadow, mug in hand, newspaper folded beside him, the quiet morning light outlining his shoulders. Sometimes I stood there a moment, taking him in. The man who once seemed carved from rules and restraint now looked peaceful, settled, at ease in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever seen. And when he'd catch me staring, he'd smirk. "What?" he'd say. "Nothing," I'd reply. "You just look happy." He'd tilt his head thoughtfully, like happiness was a word he was still trying out, then shrug lightly. "Maybe I am." There was something about the simplicity of those mornings, no weight, no guarded silence, that made them feel more intimate than anything else. We didn't need to talk about what we were becoming. We didn't need labels or declarations. The quiet said enough. The rest of our days fell into a comforting rhythm. After closing my shop each afternoon, I'd find him waiting for me. Sometimes on the couch, sometimes near the window, sometimes leaning against the counter while sorting through a takeout menu. Other nights, he came home exhausted from work, hanging his jacket on the chair before dropping onto the couch with a sigh that said everything words couldn't. On those nights, he didn't talk much, and he didn't need to. He'd just lean his head against my shoulder, letting the tension soak slowly out of him. I'd rest my hand over his, grounding him, and the silence would become something gentle instead of heavy. "Rough shift?" I'd ask quietly. He'd nod, eyes closed. "Yeah, but it's better coming home here." That word, home, settled in my chest every time, warm and unexpected. When spring finally started pushing the cold back, we found ourselves spending more time outside. Walks through the neighborhood, drives out past the old stretch of farmland just to watch the sun dip behind the hills. Sometimes we listened to music in the car. Other times we didn't speak at all. There was never pressure to fill the quiet. That was something we'd learned early, that silence could be a kind of closeness too. One Saturday afternoon, we walked past the Redwood County Public Safety Office, the place where all of this started. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing. Maybe because the version of him who belonged to that place wasn't the only version of him I knew anymore. He slowed his steps. I matched them. "Feels like a lifetime ago," he said quietly. "You mean since the bee nearly took you down?" I teased. He groaned under his breath. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance." He shook his head, a laugh slipping out before his expression softened. His gaze lingered on the building, but something in his eyes wasn't looking at the present. He was looking backward, tracing steps that led to here. "I spent years walking in and out of that place without thinking," he said. "Routine. Duty. Then you walked in one afternoon and everything started to shift." I turned to look at him. Really look. The man who once lived behind a wall of control now stood beside me. Steady, open, warm in ways he didn't try to hide anymore. "Maybe it wasn't the moment," I said. "Maybe it was timing." He nodded thoughtfully. "Or maybe it was you." The air stilled, not awkward, not charged, just full. Full of something quiet and real and steady. Then he did something he hadn't done before. He reached for my hand. Not cautiously, not checking to see who was around. He just laced his fingers through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the shift in him then. Not the man afraid of being seen, but the man ready to be. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think people like us didn't get happy endings." I squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe we don't. Maybe we just get new beginnings." His smile turned slow and honest. "I'll take that." We kept walking, our steps in rhythm, the cool spring air curling around us. The streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow catching in the corners of his smile. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. We still had rough days, quiet nights, moments where the old fears tried to creep back in. But every time one of us drifted into silence, the other reached gently, grounding without demanding. And that was enough. One night, months later, we ended up on the couch again, the room lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. He leaned against me, eyes half closed from exhaustion. I brushed a thumb over his hand. "You know," I said quietly, "when I walked into that station, I thought I was just there to file a report." He huffed a tired laugh. "And instead you found me half dying from a bee sting." "I found more than that," I said. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he shifted closer and pressed a slow, warm kiss to my forehead. Simple, steady, unhurried. A gesture that said everything he didn't need to speak aloud. My chest tightened in the gentlest way. These were the moments that built us. Not grand gestures, not sudden confessions, but the quiet notes in the song we were learning together. The everyday softness two guarded people never expected to share. And as I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, I realized something with the kind of clarity that doesn't rush. Love hadn't arrived in a rush or a flood. It hadn't knocked down the door or swept me off my feet. It had come softly, through a sting, a towel, a shared meal, a touch on the arm, a quiet evening. It had come as a man learning how to be gentle after years of being strong. It had come as a home I didn't know I was allowed to have again. When the night settled fully and he drifted to sleep, I whispered the truth to the quiet room, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I went there to file a report, and somehow I found you." And in the soft glow of that moment, I finally understood that maybe the best stories don't start with lightning. They start with small things that grow into something big enough to change everything.